proceed. It is very easy for me to state and to explain how you should do the theoretical review. But doing it is not as easy as saying it. So you cannot prove that you have understood me not until you have written something following my explanation. You will find that there are some issues you will experience which I was not able to explain. And as you go through them, you are learning, because we cannot explain everything because situations differ. How many theories should I give? This question is not about the issue, the number of theories per se. It is whether you are able to identify a theory that explains the whole of your study problem. Because some people have their study problems broken down into several concepts, and as I have said that a theory may have assumptions, you may find out that the theoretical assumption relevant to your study is only explaining part of your study problem, which therefore requires you another theory to explain the remaining part. So in that way, you may have more than one theory. But if you find that the theoretical assumptions you have quoted are able to explain all the assumptions in your study, then even one theory may be enough. So 2, 3, 4, it is not that when you use the 4 theories, your study is so great. But they are used for what? Each theory should be explaining a different aspect within your study. Not to bring 2 theories, all of them are explaining the same thing. Because in research, we buy a particular view when we are moving. So one may be enough as long as it is thorough. For example, for a study explaining the relationship between a IV and DV, somebody may have many theories or may have one theory. For example, somebody may get a theory which explains only the IV, and another theory which explains only the DV, and a theory which explains the relationship between the IV and DV. That can all be applicable. If that is your approach, you are interested in explaining the nature of the IV, how does it happen, and so on, and the nature of the DV, how does it happen, why does it happen, and so on. And then you want also to explain the nature of the relationship. In other words, how does the IV cause the DV? That causation process. You may, and there is a theory that explains the causation process. But for example, a person who is only interested in explaining how does the IV causes the DV may not be interested in explaining how does the IV occur. May only use one theory and goes away. I may have not thoroughly answered that question, but that is my view. the Conceptual Review section discusses the definitions and meanings of your study variables, IV and DV, according to different authors. Like we said before, there are steps of review. You put down the concepts which you want to conceptually explain. Then you identify the synonyms. The purpose of identifying the synonyms is to be able to identify the different sources which have explained that concept, but probably they used a different word which is similar to this word you are also investigating upon. Otherwise, if you are limited to only one word, you may limit your access to a number of sources. Otherwise, when you are presenting, there is nowhere you are going to write the synonyms. Or, depending on the flow, you may write about them. So you have identified the synonyms, then identify the studies or the authors who tried to provide a conceptual description of that concept, IV concept or DV concept. Then after having identified them, you do a quick scanning, and then those you have selected, you do a critical reading of their definitions. And after reading, then you write. I always say that we read more and write less. We read more and write less. Some people do the opposite. They read less and write more. If you have read, for example, 10 pages, we expect that you will write 1 page. So if you have literature of 10 pages, we expect that you have read about 100 pages of literature. So do a critical reading and then write. When you are writing, you give at least 2 or more definitions of each variable from different authors. To a PhD, we may expect 3 or more. Why? Because we are not expected to understand something in only one way. Because there are different views. Take a simple example of a case we used, a very simple one. We called it household size, the size of the household. When we talk about that concept, different meanings will come to different people. How do we measure, for example, the size of a household? What do we mean by the size of a household? When you go deep into it critically, at first you may think it is easy, but when you go deep into it critically, you may find that it is a complex concept, which requires understanding from different angles. For example, when somebody can quickly say, household size simply means the bigness of the house a family is having. Another one may say, no, the size of a household also means the number of members in that household, whether big or small. The number can be big or can be small. Another one may say, no, it also includes the relatives of that family, whether they are few or many. Because some people have a wider network of the family, others have a small network. But when it comes to who do we consider to be a member of the household, complexity will come. Who do you consider, or who do you consider to count as a household member? Because you may have said that the number of members in a household. Now, who do we consider to be a member? Do we consider the father, the mother? Do we consider the children? Do we consider the relatives? Do we consider the friends? Who do we consider? Now you will find out that the complexity of the calculation of the family size will now increase as you consider the other types of members. Because you may come into my household and you find many people during the day, but when it comes at night, you find all of them have gone back. Meaning that some people can be seen as members of the family when they are just visitors. So how do you consider them? You may go to a family and you only find the mother and you think there are no people. But when the husband has gone to work and is soon coming back, you may think they don't have the children when the children have gone to school and they will come back. They may even be in boarding, in hostels, that they will take 3 months without coming back. But after 3 months, they are coming because they are part of that. So who do you consider? There could be members of a household who are away for a certain period of time. Somebody went to Uganda to study. He will be away for 3 years, but eventually will come back. Is he considered a member of the household? And when you are going to collect data about household members, how will you collect that data to ensure that even the members who are away can be considered in your calculations? So, conceptual review seems easy, but it gives you a broader picture of understanding the nature of the variable. That's why we said do a critical reading and then write. When you are writing, give at least 3 definitions of each variable from the different authors. Then discuss these definitions critically. By discussion, we mean you identify the differences and similarities in those definitions. What aspect one definition brings out, the other one doesn't bring out. You shed more light on what do those definitions mean. By bringing out the differences and similarities, you are able to point out the point of departure and point of joining. Where do they join? Where do they agree? And where do they not agree? It may not be a disagreement per se, but what did one definition leave out that was brought out by the other? So that adds to your understanding of the concept you are talking about. Give those different definitions. We said that if you find out that 2 or more authors presented the same definition, you don't need to give them as different definitions. You can cite all of them, like in this example, and then you present their similar definition at once. So this section of conceptual review can be subdivided into two subsections, as explained here. The first subsection, 2.2.1, is a subsection of the independent variable where you discuss the definitions and the meanings of the IV according to the opinions of different authors and experts. Here we said you start by giving the definitions of your IV from different authors, as I have explained before. Then you go ahead and point out the specific elements of your IV according to the different authors. The specific elements. If a variable has no elements, tell us how can your IV be measured according to different authors. Because elements means you break down the IV, a concept, into sub-concepts. But if a concept does not have sub-concepts per se, then how do we measure it? Take an example of the concept I've been talking about, the household size. You may not necessarily have the sub-concepts, but you may have the different approaches of measuring. Just like I said, one definition may only include the father, the mother, and the children of the household. Another definition may also include the relatives. Another definition may also include the visitors. Another, and so on. So the different ways in which that variable is measured. If two or more authors gave the same definition, do not give them as different definitions. Mention, cite all of them at once and give their definition as one. We said you are free to discuss the definitions given by the different authors, giving the similarities and differences in those definitions. Also bring out the strength and weaknesses in those definitions. Like I may say that this definition, which concentrates on only the father, the mother, and the children, leaves out the fact that many households are housing relatives for time or forever. So there are also households which are housing people which are adopting some other members. They are not even relatives, but they have become part of those families. So those could be the strength or the weaknesses you may point out, which you think a particular author was ignoring a particular point or left out a particular point. And we know there is no author who is perfect. Even you yourself, as you have shared from the different authors, you will not develop the perfect definition. So given those definitions, I mean, those weaknesses which you think other people left out, the researcher may suggest additions of what was left out by the previous people who defined, and this makes part of the contribution of the researcher to knowledge. Now, if possible, go ahead and define each element of the IV according to different authors, and also point out its indicators and show how it is measured. So these measurements, which you point out, all indicators of the variable, are very important when you are collecting data, because those are the indicators you go and collect data about. A summary of the elements of your IV or DV are the ones we put together into a conceptual framework. If, for example, you have identified 5 elements of the IV, each element is given as a bullet in the conceptual framework. Because the conceptual framework is a summary of concepts the researcher is going to examine in a study. We should also note that this is what is referred to as conceptualization and further conceptualization of a variable. And it is from here that the questions for our research questionnaire or data collection instrument come. If you do not do a thorough conceptual review, you may not have relevant or valid questions to ask, because the questions will come from your head and they will not come from the measures which previous researchers have used to measure that variable. Usually, each indicator we point out here makes a question or questions. This is a case demonstration of a conceptual review. You can go through it and see that the aspects we said you should bring out, for example, the standard definitions from other authors, the elements of other authors, the measures or the indicators. So you can go through this, because you see in this study, organizational commitment is the IV, and you will see how it is broken down. And so on. As you see here, we have indicated, for example, that each element is also defined so that we can get the indicators, the specific indicators associated to that variable. And during the construction of the questionnaire, these are the indicators we shall use to define, to define the questions and so on. So if you have done conceptual review of the IV, it will be the same thing you will do for the DV. That's why we say do the same like you did for IV. We were supposed to do a task here on conceptual review. And I wanted us to do this task in groups. I'm seeing around 40 members on this group. And I think we would create 4 groups. and write a paper on these subsections. Anyway, I will refine this task and I send it to you as a group. Then you will join the groups. The coordinator will divide and assign members to the groups. That's all. We can now go to empirical review.